After more than a decade as president and CEO of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards steps down in May, but she vows to keep on fighting, and she has a long history of it, too. Richards supported her first political campaign at the age of 2, and in 6th grade, she's protested her teacher's instructions to pray after the Pledge of Allegiance. Her teacher told her she was just trying to make trouble, and she says she's been doing that ever since. She documents it all in her new memoir, Make Trouble, Standing Up, Speaking Out, and Finding the Courage to Lead, and she joined me recently to talk about it. Cecile, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So you're leaving one of the most important, visible jobs in America. One, why? And two, are you having any regrets already or no?
Oh, of course, you always have regrets. I mean, this is the best job I've ever had. I've been the president of Planned Parenthood for 12 years. I've been an organizer all my life and an activist, and part of what I've always believed in is bringing other folks along with you. And I hope I've mentored a lot of women, and we've invested in a lot of young organizers. And so it's also important as a leader to know how to step aside and make room for the next generation, which I hope I'm doing. But even though I'm leaving, I'm not leaving the field of social justice and activism. So I'll be on the sidelines cheering on this next person.
Speaking of bringing people along, I mean, everybody, I assume people know you've increased the numbers of members and volunteers exponentially. Affordable Care Act has free birth control.
That's right.
In it. Were it not for you and your organization, that wouldn't have happened. But do you worry in these times about how fragile so much of that may be, or do you think everything is...
Look, everything at this day and time is fragile, and certainly in this administration. But I also think that as an organizer, you also have to recognize a moment, and I think we're in one of those right now. I mean, I've been marching and organizing my whole life. I have never seen anything to equal what's happened this last year. And even at Planned Parenthood, because I would say, you know, the month after this new administration came in, folks didn't give us a chance of surviving. And yet, because of grassroots energy and organizing, not only did we beat back defunding, we prevented the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and now we have millions of people who are keenly focused on the fight ahead.
But you know, Trump's only been there a year. You know that. I just want to be clear.
Oh, no, absolutely. But this was a critical year. I think,
no, of course.
Look, a lot of things could have happened after the inauguration. It could have been everyone just went and said, oh, my God, you know, like it's all over. But instead, of course, we saw the biggest marches ever the day after he was inaugurated.
Speaking about the inauguration, you had a meeting shortly after the inauguration in which Jared Kushner made you an offer you could refuse. What did Kushner say to you?
So Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump said they wanted to meet about Planned Parenthood because, of course, her father had pledged to defund Planned Parenthood. And I thought, well, what do I have to lose? You know, it's important to at least tell them what we do. And I did, but it turned out the purpose was to try to make a deal, as he would say, that in exchange for us no longer providing abortion access to our patients, he could help guarantee funding. And
even though federal funding doesn't go to that particular purpose.
Exactly, and that's what I tried to explain to him. And I said, actually, the funding you're talking about cutting off goes for birth control, which of course helps prevent unintended pregnancy, and cancer screenings and STI testing. And I think he was really more looking for a political victory. And
do you think he knew that, by the way? Do you think he knew? I mean, there's so many moments.
I don't know what he knew. I really don't know what he knew. I do think there was, I mean, as I look back at it now, I think they were anxious because they knew that defunding Planned Parenthood was going to be wildly unpopular. They'd just seen millions of people in the street on women's rights. And I thought maybe he thought we were so desperate for the funding that we would abandon women. And I just said, that's not who we are. That's not what we'll do. You
know, I'm going to stay on the threats just for a second, though.
Yeah.
You have a great story about working for this woman who at 26 argued Roe v. Wade, Sarah Weddington, right?
Right.
And argued before the Supreme Court in the early 70s. Obviously, it's 45 years on. It's very possible this president may be able to appoint another justice, 2, maybe even 3, to the Supreme Court. Do you worry about Roe v. Wade or no?
Everyone does. I mean, anyone who's not worried about Roe isn't paying attention, honestly. And I do think that is for progressives why all of this organizing up to this date has been so critical, because that is going to be the big fight. If he gets a Supreme Court nominee, that's why the Senate race was so important last year. And look, I mean, this is a president, and we are looking at the kinds of judges he's putting into the federal bench. They are some of the most extreme, some of the most unqualified, and of course, primarily they are predominantly men Anglo men, and I think that it's a real danger for the future.
But as we talked about yesterday, I guess, on the radio, even if Roe v. Wade stays the law of the land, things that, what was it called, HB2, whatever it was called in Texas, which you know as well as anybody, which says, sure, you have a right to an abortion under the Constitution, we'll just make it impossible for you to exercise that right. What some women had to travel 100+ miles until the Supreme Court ruled. That backdoor route is the one that's proven fairly successful, has it?
Well, although I will point out, and of course it's in the book, the story of what happened there in Texas, because that was the purpose. They said, well, we'll just pass these restrictions that are impossible to meet, so women won't be able to access abortion services. But basically, the important thing about this, and why I think it's an important book, because it is about the resilience of organizing. 3 years later, after that bill was passed, Planned Parenthood kept operating during all that time. We were providing abortion services to women. Women were telling their stories. Folks were documenting the harm. And, of course, the Supreme Court overturned that law. And that, to me, is really important. That you have to remember, this is a long-haul fight. This is not, we did never earn our rights because of, just a magical moment. It is because people never gave up. So the Supreme Court's going to be a critical battle. I think folks are geared up for that and ready for that. I just read a poll. It looked like 20% of the people in this country have already taken part in a march or some kind of protest, which is historic.
Speaking of, you have to have a long view. When your mother was elected governor of Texas, of all places, what was it, 28 years ago, if I had said to you, we would not have a woman president in 28 years, we'd only have, even though I think it's the high watermark, roughly 20% of the Congress women, what would you have said to me in 1990 when she won that vote?
Of course, that was also a situation where she was never supposed to win.
I know that.
No polls ever showed it, and it was because of this grassroots outpouring in Texas. And I do write a lot about that in the book, about just how are all these things kind of aligned, and people just kept going, including my mother, even though they said, you can't do that. We could never elect you. I think we are now. Do I wish we'd made more progress? Absolutely. Do I think women are having an outsized influence? The ones that are in Congress or the 3 women on the Supreme Court, it's all the difference. But this year, people ask me, what would Mom think? Because, of course, she's not here to opine, but she would be so excited to see so many women running for office. We have more women running for Congress than ever before. Young women who are not waiting their turn. They're not waiting to be asked. And one of my mottos now is start before you're ready. And that's what I think people are doing. But we have a lot of ground to make up. But I think women, interestingly, I would say right now women are the most important political force in the country.
We only have 1 minute left. This sort of a how-to of activism. It's not only your story.
Yes.
And what's the one most important rule you'd say to a kid? Even in the wake of Parkland, where we've seen how resilient kids are themselves, what's the most important lesson for a young kid who maybe is a little cynical, a little depressed, to convince them that the whole fight is worth it and necessary?
I think right now this is the only life you have, so make the most of it. Don't wait, and don't be regretful that you didn't try something that maybe seemed hard or maybe impossible at the time. That's the only way social change ever happens. And again, I think if a young person coming out of college or coming out of high school, there's never been a better time to be an activist. And so no matter what the issue is that you care about, jump in now. It'll be, because I think young people are going to change the direction of America.
As soon as you finish reading the book.
That's right.
Richards, it's great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thank you.
The book again is Make Trouble, Standing Up, Speaking Out, and Finding the Courage to Lead.